Welcome, Pisces, to a new cosmic chapter. Saturn moves out of your sign and into Aries once more on February the 14th. If you recall, you did have a brief interlude from the 25th of May to the 1st of September last year, but also Neptune moved out of your sign on the 30th of March and into Aries. So we had a first blush of this combination last year, and that will have given you some insights into how things might be. But Saturn can, of course, be about structures and also boundaries. But most of all, it's the planet which governs time. And we're beginning a new celestial journey for us all because Aries is the first zodiac sign. So over the next 29 and a quarter years, Saturn will be making its way through the heavens. But we need to have a brief retrospective of Saturn having made its way through your zodiac sign. What's the implications of that being? But also, as much as we can focus on Saturn being in Aries, the combination with Neptune on the 20th for the first time in 37 years, the 20th of February, and the retrograde, which begins on the 26th of July for 5 months, and the upcoming aspects, which I'm going to share with you, it's vitally important that we look at the overall celestial map. So when Saturn arrives, what is that telling us? Because that's going to provide a backdrop for the next 2 years that's broader than just Saturn in Aries. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundel. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're a returning visitor, your views, likes, and comments are truly appreciated. I've been getting quite a few hypes. If that appeals to you, please support me with those. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've yet to subscribe, please help the channel to continue to thrive. So on the screen is your event chart. And there is the mighty Saturn at 0 degrees in Aries. Now, if we look at your ruling planet, obviously the modern ruler is Neptune, so that's influential, but also Jupiter, your traditional ruler, that's in a very strong part of your chart and will be through to the end of June. Now, for sure, it is in a retrograde, and Jupiter retrogrades last 4 months. They can slow things down. But because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, it's about as good as you can get, but it's in a very bubbly opposition to the position of the moon. Now, the moon in technical astrology is not at its best in the sign of Capricorn, said to be detrimented. But for you, that's a very social placement for the moon to be. And Jupiter being in the fifth house can be great for confidence, self-belief, and assurance when it comes to your interactions with others, potentially romantic, but particularly creative. Because I feel the combination of Saturn and Neptune exactly together on the 20th of February for the first time in 37 years is really helpful if you are one of those Pisces people. And I know there are lots of Pisces people who are hugely talented, whether it's with performance, whether it's with music, whether it's with art, whether it's with installations, whether it's with pottery, whatever is the thing that you shine at, I think that combination gives you the potential to feel quite upbeat. Now, also in your own zodiac sign, you have Venus and Mercury and the North Node. And Mercury and the Node are very close together. So your thinking, but your instincts, but also your appreciation of style, beauty, and form are all magnificently boosted. You do, however, though, have a collective of energy in the 12th house. And ever since Pluto first moved there for around 11 weeks, 10, 11 weeks, in the spring of 23, you may have felt that some things in your life were coming to a natural close, but also a much more psychological phase began, which really started to pick up pace from November 2024. And more recently, there may have been a part of you that was really reflecting on your past history, your roots, relationships, old flames, and more to do with the instinctive side of life, which you have an appreciation for, but I think you've been diving deep. And one of the things that I think can happen over the next 2 years is that with the Sun in a square with the restless electric energies of Uranus in the third house of quick communications, you might be surprised by some of the emotions that come up and come out that you express over these next 24 months, Saturn in Aries through to April 28. But just know that Saturn in the second house is going to ask you to work on your life foundations. And particularly if they have been perhaps a little more informal, relaxed, or laid back, it's asking you to get more discipline. That's what Saturn's job is for. But remember, Saturn can also be about wisdom. So you could find yourself talking to someone about financial affairs, how you might use your resources a bit more shrewdly, squeeze a bit more from the resources that you have in a canny way. But that combination of Saturn and Neptune together exactly on the 20th of February, do know because they were so close together last year, we really did have a big exposure to what this particular aspect is about. And I think really, as much as we can go about trying to earn money and gain money in a very functional and practical way, Saturn, I think Neptune's saying to you, it also needs to feel right in terms of your personal values. So if you're doing something at the moment, for example, to earn a living, and you're not really enjoying it, doesn't feed your soul, that could be the area that sees you a little restless. And maybe that's the energy that will come up and into the open with Uranus's right angle to the Sun. So your thinking may at times be a little changeable. But if you just take that overwhelming theme into this next 2 years, that your traditional ruler is very strongly supported by the moon. If you think things positively, the chances are you will bring them more likely to you. But if you are doing something in terms of your living that you're not enjoying, I think the next 2 years could see you making a change. Uh, but if you are a creative and you have fabulous flair, this chart is very, very strong for you, but it's asking you to dig deep. There may actually be some old skills, experiences, and knowledge that you've gained over a period of time that you haven't been using more recently that will come back into focus and in some ways or another join into the bridge that is seeing you move forwards into a new reality. But Saturn in the second house can also make you perhaps a bit firmer on your values. If there are people around you who don't share your values, you may find yourself a bit less yielding. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can help you to define who's really right for you or not. But if you are looking to work on your sense of personal value, because the second house can be about that, and Saturn can test it. So if you do feel, if there are some wounds, many of us have them, if there are some wounds, just know the Sun's angle to Chiron, a sextile, is very, very helpful. So over the next 2 years, you can strengthen your identity, Aries, but particularly don't define yourself by how much money you earn or by the more practical attributes of life, although they're important. We all need a roof over our head. We all need a certain amount of routine. Those things are very important, particularly to a mutable sign like you. But just know there is the potential to strengthen your sense of self. But that may mean releasing something you do at the moment that perhaps pays the bills, but just doesn't quite work for you. Now, we've got some very important upcoming aspects. And on the 8th of March, there's a conjunction between Venus and Saturn. You may have a very serious conversation about a financial matter at that time. If you're in a partnership, Venus can be about relating, of course, and a partner's not paying their way, it's not equitable, you're going to be more assertive. That's going to be repeated when the Sun combines with Saturn on the 25th of March. However, on the 28th, Pluto, which has been giving you an opportunity to quarry deep into your past experiences and knowledge, forges a fabulous exact sextile to Saturn. And if you are changing, you're finding your inner world is changing and you're becoming much more robust in terms developing more resistance to pressures, that will show up at that time in a very pleasing way. Now, there is on April the 19th a conjunction between Saturn and Mars, so the two malefics come together. If there is someone around you who you feel tends to take you for granted, doesn't value your input, because you can be so giving, but that actually can be where people can unfortunately take advantage of you. But you may be having none of it at that time and actually be very, very assertive. Good for you if so. But as we go into the summer, on the 6th of July, there is a square, an exact square between the Sun for you in the glorious fifth house of Cancer, but Saturn in the second house. That's not the best of times to do anything speculative. And also from July the 26th, Saturn goes retrograde in your second house. So through to the 10th of December, I think really looking after the pennies will help to look after the pounds. So you may become much more conscious of the more archetypal energies of Saturn creating resistance. Doesn't mean to say there's not still opportunities. But then late in the year, there's a square between the Sun in Capricorn, your sector of friendship, and Saturn in your second house. If there is someone who shows up this year, you could become much more conscious around those friendships. Maybe you've had alliances in the past that, you've rubbed along pretty well. But if someone's values really don't align with you, however positive that opposition between the moon and Jupiter is as you go into this new epoch, if you like, and however strong having Venus, which is exalted in your sign, along with the node and Mercury, I just feel that you could find yourself being a bit more determined and being a bit choosier about who you spend time with. Now, the other thing to tell you about Pisces, if you are someone like me who has a very weak resistance to anything calorific, you might find this can be the year when you really start to grapple with trying to eliminate from your diet things that aren't really for the best. So that can be ice cream, chocolate, wine, or at least have them in more moderation. Saturn, very moderating. But if you really want to lose a load of weight and get a bit leaner and eat more whole foods, and perhaps if you can afford it, some organics or local food, do so, because Saturn in the second house will really appreciate that. And most of all, your body will as well. And also perhaps your bank balance. So if, however, you're someone like me who has got a very weak boundary around these things, it may be an area that you have to work a little harder at. So, in terms of understanding this change in more detail, my February deep dive for Pisces, along with an illustration of the solar eclipse, the first in Aquarius for 8 years on the 17th of February, but also in the last week of the month, there's a crunching right angle between Mars and Uranus, which could be quite challenging for us all collectively. There is a lovely link, however, between Venus in your sign and Jupiter as the month comes to a close that can be very lucky for you. So to understand what the rest of February holds for you, please click on the link for February, and you can see underneath this video where you can download an in-depth guide of Saturn through Aries to help you through these next 2 years. Now, one of the intriguing things about the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune on the 20th of February at 0 degrees is that 0 degrees is the vernal point, so the start of the zodiac. It's where on the spring equinox the whole journey begins again. So having the combination between Saturn and Neptune there is particularly intriguing to me because there's a form of astrology called draconic astrology, where the North Node is moved from wherever it is in the natal chart to 0 degrees Aries. And that can change a chart quite a bit. But the person I want to give you a little bit of an insight to of how this works is Madonna. So on the screen is Madonna's nativity, and she was a Leo. So obviously a person who's a performer has to have a degree of glow and radiance and magnetism, and having the sun, but also Uranus in the sign of of Leo, along with Venus. Venus, I think, is the love of theatrics. Uranus is the confidence to be different. I think the Sun being in the third decan of the sign of Leo, subruled by Mars, is the passion, but also a bit more edge. You can also see when it comes to the edge that Uranus and Mars are in a square. So that gives this person an appreciation of being provocative. Mars is the most prominent planet in the whole chart. So it is going to be very important. It's about pushing boundaries. However, if we dive a little deeper, that cluster of energy in her 12th house points towards someone who could think about things very deeply. Obviously, with the Virgo ascendant and the moon on it, someone who has a great appreciation of their immediate environment. But I feel that's the side of Madonna that has a real interest in psychology, healing, and anything to do with mythology and things like the Kabbalah. And in terms of her success, I feel that's driven a lot by the Sun and Jupiter being in a wonderful sextile, so potentially very fortunate. But if we look at that North Node, which I mentioned before, for her it's on a fixed star called Speaker, Spica, and people with planets on Speaker tend to be very prominent, can be hugely successful, and build up a big following. So the combination between the North Node and Jupiter suggests her life karma, her direction of travel, the North Node, has been about finding balance, interest in the arts, but definitely an ability to make money. So that's her natal chart. But let's look at Madonna's draconic chart. So remember, the North Node is at 2402 in her natal. We go to a draconic, and there is the North Node at 0 degrees Aries on the exact degree that this Saturn Neptune conjunction is happening. And that's why I wanted to tell you about it. Now, when I did share Madonna's chart a few years ago and said that she was a Leo, I had loads of people write to me and say, no, she's not, she's an Aquarius. But clearly, she is a Leo because she's born on the 16th of August. But in the draconic version of the chart, her sun is on the anaretic degree of Capricorn. So this is a person with a real instinct for business, but also perhaps with the flavor of progressiveness that comes from Aquarius energy, which is the combination still of Pluto and Mercury, very analytical, but uh, the combination of the ascendant and the moon in Aquarius is very much more to do with being groundbreaking than the Virgo in her natal chart, which can be someone who wants to provide services, is very detail orientated, very organized. She may be all of those things, but in this chart, the more radical part of her nature really is that much more visible. She still has the need to perhaps be more meditative, quiet, take time out of the limelight with the 12th house energy. And also, Saturn in the fourth house means that, you know, home and family is important to her. And I think it's right that she's adopted some children. So that shows a great responsibility and a great empathy to look after those who are less fortunate. But that combination of the planets stay in the same relationship, so we have the same aspect. We still have Uranus in a square with Mars, but Mars here is also very close to Speaker in a nature chart. So as Mars, draconic, conjunct the North Node and Jupiter in her natal. And, you know, the ninth house is about expansion, it's about risk, independence. Uh, it is true that Mars is technically detrimented, but in this illustration, you can see that the Moon and Mars still very strong, so she's a great communicator. So, what the principles of draconic astrology are is that they're the root of who we are. So, when we come into this world, draconic's the root of our personality, and the natal is the fruit that comes from the tree of life that we go through. So, if we really work at it, we can see the outcome of our life physical journey much more like the natal chart. But some people find the draconic chart represents their personalities much more. For example, my draconic midpoint, sun and moon, is Cancer, you know, and I am very much a home lover. And people who are close to me been close to me for a very long time. I value those relationships very much. So, if you'd like to understand the difference between your natal chart and your draconic chart, just like I've shared for Madonna, you can order your draconic 12-month forecast and get your character analysis, your draconic life roadmap report. And if you apply Draco 26 at the checkout, you'll get 50% off. But also, if you would like to order your natal 12-month forecast and natal life roadmap report, if you apply Astro 26 at the checkout, you can get 50% off for those too.